All right, factor endowments and the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, right? So this is very central. This theory is actually very central to most examination questions that we get. I haven't seen the second assignment. But it's pretty much we are going to get this. There's a high likelihood that we are going to come across this because of how important this is. It's kind of like the fulcrum of what we've been doing over the past weeks, starting from Adam Smith, right through looking at when we talk of relative advantage. So this kind of like sums it up and makes it a little bit more interesting and more realistic. All right, but of course, since this is a theory, like any other theory, we need to base it on assumptions. We need to work with assumptions for it to make some sense. All right, so assumption number one, obviously, to simplify this, we must assume two nations, nation one and nation two, and two commodities, X and Y, and then two factors of production, labor and capital. So you can see now how we've moved from the labor theory of value that we mentioned earlier, right, to incorporate capital as well, so that it's a little bit closer to reality, right? And then, of course, we must also assume that both nations use the same technology in production, right? And then commodity X is labor intensive, and then commodity Y is capital intensive. So this is in all our examples here. Then both commodities are produced under constant returns to scale. So, okay. And then there is incomplete specialization in production in both nations, and then tastes are equal in both nations. And then there is perfect competition in both nations and sector markets in both nations, right? So it's perfect competition in both commodities and sector markets, right? And then there's perfect factor mobility within each nation, but no international factor mobility. So meaning, okay, no, we're going to explain this right below them. And then transport costs, of course, assume no traffic, and then other obstructions to free flow, assume those don't exist, right? And then all resources are fully all resources are fully employed. And then number 11, which is supposed to appear down there, international trade between two nations is balanced, right? But let's just briefly look at the explanations there. So on assumption one, where we talk about two nations, two commodities, and two factors, so this one is basically just to simplify, right? We of course know that in reality, you're not going to be dealing with nations, but in economics, we basically want to try and explain reality by making up simple models here, right? So that we can explain, patterns of trade, basically, right? Assumption number two. So if you are assuming that both nations are using the same technology, we basically mean we are looking at the access, right, to the technology and the same general production techniques. So in other words, if the factor prices are the same in both of those nations, then we would expect that they would have the same product profitability frontiers. They should pretty much look the same. So we are saying everything is the same except for the factor prices, right? And that's what we are basically looking at there when we talk of both nations use the same technology, right? And then on number three, of course.
Gandalf, sorry to disturb you. So what happens in a case where, okay, sorry, my child is crying. What happens in a case whereby the nations don't have the same technology? For instance, you can have China, which is advanced in technology, and perhaps one African country. Yes, one African country that is not advanced in technology.
Not advanced in technology. So the reality here is technology. When we speak of technology now, that's a very good point, which is gonna come in here actually much later in our explanations. So if you talk of technology and you look at countries like Japan that have got good technology, you might want to consider that we say that technology is going to be used in the making of capital equipment, as is the case, right? So under those instances, technology is not the same, I agree, and that comes to play when we see the capital equipment that is produced in Japan compared to the equipment that we produce here in Africa, right? That's the aspect where technology is not the same, right? But here we are considering access to technology, right? And the same general production technique. So we're not exactly saying technology is the same, but we are just saying access to technology is not the same. Access to technology is the same. Technology is not the same. So let me just make this example.
If they are using the same technology, are they producing the same products? And are we talking about the same industries, or we're talking about different industries? Who is producing similar or different products?
Let's suppose, okay, with Levo's question, let's suppose it's the same product. Let's suppose it's the same product. But let's look at it this way, right? Let's look at it this way. The reason why, for instance, Africa and Japan are going to be different in terms of technology is not because one country naturally has more technology than the other country, right? It's got to do with the labor force in that country, or in terms of the, let me say, the thought process in that country. Let me not use labor, since we're going to use labor again to mean hard labor working. But let's just say the institutions and the technology in that country is driven by the way the people think in that country. So we all have access to the same technology. But at the end of the day, some others are quicker, you see, in developing that technology than here in Africa, you see. So at the end of the day, here the assumption is both nations have access to the same general production techniques. But let's look at the driving force to technology, okay? The driving force to innovation and technology. We are looking at institutions that are found in those countries. So in a country, if you take a student now, a science student, probably doing high school in Japan, and you compare that student with a science student in Africa in high school, we are miles away. We are not the same, you see. Though in theory, we all have access to the same technology, but because for them now, when we talk of what we are going to be discussing here, they have more access to learning equipment. They have more access to better institutions than us. So in other words, for them, going to school and learning the right thing is a lot cheaper than when you are in Africa. So if you learned like me some years ago, just to use myself as an example, there were times when we've had to study on candles, you know, we've had to study on candles. So, which means when it comes to production of goods, or when it comes to innovation and when it comes to technology, I obviously can't perform just like a child who's been using a computer since they were 3, you see. So why are those ones a lot, better than the one? Why are those students a lot better than us here? It's because of though we all have access to the same information, but for them, it's cheaper on their side than here. So for you to go to school here, it costs you a lot than them. Not so long ago, students were striking, right? Wits University was striking. Most of the students couldn't be registered. So these are some of the problems that we are facing in Africa, which at the end of the day, 10, 15 years down the line, technology is not going to be the same. We can't compare with a country which sponsors their kids right through from the start to the end. You see, so that's the reason why technology ends up being different. But that's not the case that we're looking at here. And again, there are a number of other explanations that we can come up with to explain differences in technology, right? But at the end of the day, the assumption here is we have access, we are basically talking about access to the same technology. So in other words, if we are saying, if you take a student from Africa and you put them in China or you put them in Japan, that student should be able to, the assumption is the student should perform just as good as that student, you see, in Japan. So the assumption is we are all just the same. It's just a matter of, you know, who has benefited the most in terms of he had the privilege where it's cheaper to go through. So in terms of access here, when I talk of access, I'm basically talking about, say, physical access, right? But the reason why we don't have physical access here because of the costs that are involved sometimes, which is what we are going to be discussing here. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Lebo.
Yes, you're making sense.
All right, that's fine. We'll pick it up again later because what we're dealing with here, we're going to use an example of an African country and Japan or the United States. All right, and then assumption number 3, the commodity X is labor intensive and commodity Y is capital intensive. So this is what we are going to stick with here right through. So the explanation is when we talk of a commodity in labor intensive, we're basically saying it requires a lot more labor to produce than capital. So capital, we are referring to equipment and machinery here. This is what we are referring to, equipment and machinery. And then labor, we actually mean labor, right? So commodity X, an example of commodity X would be something like, say, shoes, right? I would like to assume that shoes would require a lot more labor than machinery, right? And then if you look at capital intensive commodity, maybe you want to look at computers. Computers will be an example of something that is capital intensive. It's going to need a lot of machinery to build up, something like cars as well. It's going to need equipment and machinery to build up. So we're going to stick to that assumption there. And then constant returns to scale again. So with constant returns to scale, we're basically saying if you increase, say, your labor and capital by 10% in the production of commodity X, then we expect that you are going to produce 10% more. The outcome is going to be 10% more. The return 10% more. So same with commodity Y. If you increase it by say 15%, then the outcome is going to be a 15% increase. So that's what we mean by constant return to scale. So this is obviously just an assumption, right? It might not work in reality, but this is so that we can build up a good model. And then incomplete specialization. So here we basically mean to say there is no instance where, okay, complete specialization is when one country is gonna say produce just commodity X and then the other countries producing just commodity Y. So we are not assuming that thing. So we are assuming that there is incomplete specialization. So meaning we are still gonna produce both of the commodities, but in varying quantities, right? So we are gonna deal with that again much later. And then equal taste in both nations. So of course, in reality, we don't all want the same things in the different nations, but it's a good enough assumption, right? Considering that there's globalization, our tastes are getting a lot similar, right? They're getting a lot similar, but at the end of the day, they are not exactly the same. But to build up this model again, we'll assume that our tastes and desires are the same, right? And then assumption number 7, perfect competition, of course, in both commodities and vectors market. All right. And then, so why is that important? Again, we are looking at the vector prices. So we are saying, for looking at both commodity X and commodity Y in both nations, you don't have a situation where one is too small. So we have a situation where one is too small to affect the price of these commodities, right? So in other words, the price of these commodities should purely be determined by demand and supply, right? And then on number 10, all resources are fully employed, of course. Then we are simply saying we've reached our maximum production capacity, right? And then number 11, and then international trade between two nations in balance. So this meaning to say total value of each nation's exports equals total value of each nation's imports, right? So these are the 11 assumptions that we're gonna be working with tonight. All right, so sometimes—
Sorry, Jandu.
Yes.
Yes, I have a question, but I'm not sure if it's going to be in line with these assumptions. Today, I attended the Sabia Innovation Summit, and someone raised a very interesting question to the panelists. He asked, in terms of those countries that normally do counterfeit goods, like for instance, for India and China, even if we can produce goods of the same level, at the end of the day, those countries are able to produce their own counterfeit goods. So what happens in that case, whereby you get a country that we have the same access to technology, we have the same level of production and so forth, but when they are able to produce counterfeit goods?
They are gonna. So
I think just to also enter there, remember the international trade goes with what you specialize with. And also it depends if the other countries, they are willing to do the trade, because other countries, they can decide not to trade. So therefore there will be no trade. So trade does not depend on one thing, what you have, what you not have. So it depends with different factors.
Yes, and then again, the other thing, the issue with these counterfeit goods, it has always been very controversial. It has always been very controversial, but one of the modules that we're going to be looking at, something that can be a little bit similar to that, is about the product life cycle. Product life cycle. We had that in the assignment. We are going to include it in our next notes, actually. But just to talk about that, so product life cycle is not exactly the same as counterfeit goods, right? The counterfeit goods are the ones that you're talking about, are the ones that SAPS usually confiscates from people, right? Which they normally raid and take away from people. So we have laws that regulate against that. It's illegal to do that, to make counterfeit goods in the manner in which you make, say, there's a Nike shoe that's made in the United States, and then a Nike shoe that's made in China, right? And then the one that's made in China is not as good, it's counterfeit, it's a lot cheaper. And then these ones, they usually dump in Africa, right? They usually dump in Africa. They are not allowed in the big markets. They regulate the quality of those goods. But bear in mind that the production, most of the production now is taking place in China. If you look at what's happening with like the product life cycle theory, it basically talks about you create a good product in China, no, sorry, in the United States, for instance, you design Nike, and then you start producing it there. But you realize now that production is cheaper in China than in the United States for the reasons that we are discussing here tonight. Suppose Nike requires a lot of labor and capital, and then you guys in the United States have a lot of capital than labor. So as a business owner now, it's cheaper for you to go and make a factory in China, right? And manufacture in China and then import to the United States, which is what is happening. So that's what Donald Trump used to complain about when he said, you are exporting jobs to China, right? Because most factories were closing down and reopening in China. So it means China produces everything because they have the labor advantage. There are a lot of them there, right?
But again, these guys, they're practicing that mercantilism regulation that they've created. I'm sure this regulation come from Europa, right? So because now when they basically practice that, it emphasizes to say more export, less import, meaning that they are targeting Africa because of resources. So they are putting those regulations in order for them to benefit and
True. Also,
Africa to be used as a slave, because the income for the national account has seen it, and I think it's a little bit late now. They've realized that no, we should then now create those the international trade restrictions counter. So they try to also gain, because the country of course you trade because you want to gain. So I think South Africa also realized that. That's why they put those lot of tariffs.
Tariffs. Then on the flip side now, if we wanna take this now on the flip side, it's good that now we put tariffs, for example. But let's look at a case like in the United States. If Nike is produced in the United States, it will probably be too expensive. And if it's expensive, the producers lose in terms of sales, right? Considering that Nike is not a necessity, right? Simply if the price goes up, people are gonna shift to Adidas, right? That's one aspect. And then of course, on the consumption side, it means we are losing in terms of we're not gonna be consuming a lot of Nike. So the producers will then decide, let's shift this factory, put it in China where the labor costs are cheaper. We can produce more. You know what I also discovered? When it comes to some of these accounting firms, they even outsource, say, some of the accounting duties to companies that are in India, particularly India and China. So they send those things overnight because of the cheaper rates there.
Yeah,
so
but there is a limit of the export as a part of the government regulations.
Yeah, but of course, there is a limit. And we've been, seeing all those trade wars between the countries, look at China and the United States. But it's going to be very difficult now, because if you're going to restrict imports from China, right, and then want to manufacture those things in the United States, let's say even here in Africa, let's say we don't want to manufacture a laptop here in South Africa. Let's say we don't want to import laptops here in China, but we would rather make our own laptops here. How many people can make laptops here? Not many people, right? So which means it's going to be very...
Yeah, less skilled employees that we have. That's a big challenge of Africa. So that is why you see majority of these guys, like they done with their doctors, medicine. They then go and study further the medicine outside of the country, and they start working from outside of the country. They earn what we call the income. Actually, they make growth of the income of that particular country, because now they are earning money from that side, and then they consume the products of that country. So which means the GDP of that country is growing. Because now we taking our skilled employees, they go to work outside instead of working in Africa. We do have a lot of skilled employees, just that we outsource them. They're no longer here in Africa.
They are all leaving the country.
How can you not leave if you are being promised 1 million as a part of your basic, Baba? 500,000 basic. Eh?
It's breaking a little bit. I lost you there.
Yes, I was just saying, how can you not leave if they're promising you like a 500 basic per month? That's a lot of money. Of course, I'm gonna leave.
So if you look at yourself
and go to Europe,
if you think of yourself now as a commodity, because you're also selling labor, right? You're also selling labor. So the country is also gonna export you to wealthier nations, and then hopefully you're gonna be bringing in some of the pounds. I know my brother actually also left and went to the UK some years back. A lot of other CAs are leaving just because of the rates that
let them come and sell me. I can go and run.
All right.
Baba, I need money. That's my suggestion, Jay.
And what's going to be important now about this module, I would love to hear what you would do in that in your position in government, suppose now you are in government, you are someone like Donald Trump, you are faced with this dilemma, right? For starters, okay, let's just say, let's bring it close here. Let's say you are in South Africa, right? An African country. People are leaving the country. There is brain drain. And as a result, production is going down, you know, and we're heavily reliant on imports from China. We can barely produce anything. What would you do under those circumstances to try and boost the economy?
The first thing is to look at some of the criteria or very important issues, like the issue of unemployment that we have, issue of
the network is failing us, and
because you can't on set try to find the solution of something that you don't know of. You must need to identify the issues that we're facing as a country. But first issue, level of
the network is failing us.
Yes, seemingly his network is bad.
yeah,
health system, unemployment rate, crime rate. You must look at those kind of issues. So how can you develop the country if you have got majority of the... Let's not like me anymore. Can I?
Okay, it's breaking. Okay, let's talk about trade. All right, let's talk about international trade. Here is the issue that we are having now. Lebo brought up the issue of counterfeit goods. Right? How do we deal with that here in South Africa? Right? How would you deal with that here in South Africa?
I think we should strengthen our ports and inspection regarding these goods that come in from these other countries. I think in that manner, that can be a starting point. And I don't know. That's what I think.
Yes. And the other clue that I'm gonna give out, usually how these counterfeit goods are produced. So the determining factor usually between a counterfeit good and a genuine good is normally the price, right? And the quality, of course, but most of us will see the quality, right? It can be very difficult to tell sometimes. It's not the ones that we see running around on memes, right? Where a counterfeit really looks like a counterfeit. But if it's a good counterfeit, then it must resemble the normal good, except that it has been produced cheaper and the price is cheap, right? So those counterfeit goods are normally produced from the same factories, by the way. So what they do in China, they have normal working hours where they are working to produce for, say you are working to produce for Nike, subcontracted by Nike. So you are producing those shoes for Nike in China, the official. And then after hours, again, you are producing Nike products, but then counterfeit products. So it's the same production, but now counterfeit products. These are not the ones going to the official Nike route. So you realize that, say, the production costs are gonna be like, say, 10 rand per shoe, for argument's sake. Nike is gonna be selling it at 30 rand per shoe because it's going through the official Nike store. Then the counterfeit one probably still sold by the same factory that makes Nike. So it's also Nike on the other side, now selling it at how much? Say at 20 rand, slightly less than that. Then they wanna put that in the market there. So what would you say about that? So who loses and who gains, considering that we are not manufacturing these goods here in Africa, we are simply importing. Would you rather import Nike expensive or Nike cheap? What's your policy on that? You are in government now. What would your policy?
Dando,
For
can you
me,
please repeat your question before anyone answers?
All right. Let's say let's
For
put
me,
it this way. Okay, just a second. Let me just rephrase the question. So you are working with the Ministry of Trade now, right? And then you are faced with the problem of counterfeit goods that are filling up our cities, right? Being sold, counterfeit goods, Nikes, Adidas, etc. They are flooding the market at a lower cost. Right? Where are they coming from? They are coming from abroad, right? From China, most of them. And then, of course, you have the official market on the other side. The official market, which is selling the official goods at a high price in the malls. What would you do? What would your policy be regarding the counterfeit goods? I mean,
for me,
banning them.
those goods, we still need them. Even though they're fake or even if they're original, but at the end of the day, we still need them. But put in mind that when they come as a fake, they won't be the same quality, it won't be the same price. So meaning that majority of the citizen of the country, they're going to afford to pay for those goods. But again, the policy that will can put in play of those kind of the products that are not of high, those ones that are for higher quality, we will also still need them in terms of the quality, because obviously who don't need the quality, so we'll always need, but obviously for the quality, because they're going to come at a higher price than what the demands have, or majority of the demand have. So of course they're going to be minimum. So it's not going to be a lot of those products. So yeah, that's my take.
Okay, Leo, what would your take be on that? We are working with the Minister of Trade. What would your take? What you think would be equitable there? Or Spiwe, and anybody? Okay, Leo, your mic is on.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. Busy with my child here.
Oh, see, sorry. That's okay.
My take. Okay, firstly, well, I think that I'm not sure if I captured your question correctly, but if I was working with the Minister of Trade, firstly, I think that when it comes to counterfeit goods, even within the counterfeit goods, there are also, as you had said, that there are those that actually look like the actual brand, and there are those that actually are counterfeits. And now it will then come to a question as to how do they then, in terms of how are they getting into the country legally or illegally? Now then it goes back again, yes. Are they coming into the country the right way or the wrong way?
The wrong way.
And also, when it comes to counterfeit goods now, recently I read somewhere that, I'm not sure if you guys know about Shein, where most of the girls, they buy from Shein and so forth. I think, yes, I think they also sell counterfeit goods because Shein is from China. So what happens with Shein is that they do not charge, I'm not sure if what they charge is called tariffs or what, but when you buy from Shein, you buy and then later on you pay a certain amount. I think it's tax, I'm not sure what is it called. So now that amount that we pay after they've processed your products and so forth, when they have to transport the goods into the country, it's not an exact amount.
Okay.
It's not a specific amount. It sometimes it depends on how many times you've bought from Shein, and sometimes it depends on the amount of goods that you bought for them. So for me, when it comes to so now for me, when it comes to these counterfeit goods, in as much as there are policies in place and so forth, because there are policies in place in terms of counterfeit goods, but in South Africa, we are not doing much in terms of how do we then regulate these counterfeit goods. Because in as much as some of them, yes, they come into the country and they are known, but how we are not regulating them in such a way that we will know that, you know, I'm not sure if you are capturing me correctly, as I had mentioned the example of Shein. Yes.
It becomes very difficult to regulate.
Yes, it becomes very difficult to then regulate these counterfeit goods.
Okay, but now considering that we are almost a third world country now, as Jasper put it also. Of course, if we block them entirely, these counterfeit goods, it means people will be walking almost naked because we can't afford genuine goods. If you look at how much clothes that we wear cost in the official market in the United States, for instance, since they are normally made for them, they'll be very expensive. So the dilemma that you'll probably be facing is if you entirely block these, block these clothes, the way we love clothes, it means most of our income is going to be spent on clothes at the end of the day. So once that happens, then we're going to see how poor we are.
I don't think that we should block completely, but we should regulate them in a manner of which we do not have those, you know, that as you had said, that there are different kinds of counterfeit goods. There are those that we cannot account for, and there are those that can be accounted for. So I think we need to find a way in which we can regulate those that we cannot account for, because there's so many counterfeit goods that we don't know where they come from and how do they get into the country. So yeah, there needs to be a way in which we can regulate those goods so that we would know what comes into the country and what doesn't. And it goes back to the fact that, you know, when you go into these Chinese shops and so forth, some of them you'd realize that they don't pay tax. Like when you purchase their goods, when you look at their till slips, it's just there's nothing that speaks of tax and so forth. So then it makes you question as to how are they able to trade? How are they able to bring their own goods into our country and not contribute to the GDP?
Yeah, I think
so
previously
I'm wrong with
you're right.
Yes.
You're right. Yeah, I think previously South Africa was regarded as a that dump area, whereby majority of these African or European countries, they will just dump. Maybe they have got 500 quality of the products, and then they also have extra just dump. So what I've noticed that means in order to limit those dump to be in our country, because we need, as much as we need clothes, we need food, but they should not be excessive in the way that we now have to allow everything, and then we can't produce for ourselves. We still need to be a producer. At the end of the day, we still need to produce as a country. So I think the restrictions are there. Perhaps we can look at it and say government has increased those the price of the export products in order to manage those kind of restrictions.
Yeah. I think then we will tackle more of that when we're now dealing with trade restrictions, because I really want us to assess these things and see how, say, if you are in a position of power in future, what would you do in those circumstances, particularly with trade restrictions, looking at the way our country is now, the way most African countries are. And then maybe we'll do a research on that and then run the discussion around that. But in any case, okay, we're done here with the assumptions, right? We're jumping to sector intensities, and then we're saying, when we look at sector intensity, you're looking at how much of the sector, assuming, again, let's just assume now there are just two factors of production, right? Labor and capital. So when we say factor intensity, we are basically saying how much of labor does one product need, and then how much of the capital does the same product need. So in terms of the ratios now, so we're saying, if you look at shoes, for example, to assume that shoes are going to require more labor than capital, UTC. So that's what we deal with when we say labor intensity. So it's the ratio of labor to capital, or the ratio of capital to labor, as it were, right, in a product. So our assumption is product X requires more labor, and then product Y is going to require more capital. So in terms of ratios, so this is what is there with this one. And then factor abundance is what now you guys started this discussion also. It starts off there when we refer to a situation where now one country can now produce, one country can now produce a certain product a lot cheaper than the other countries as a result of being abundant in a certain factor, either labor or capital. So if you read here on the notes, you realize that factor abundance comes in two ways. Now we are looking at countries, right? It comes either as a result of the price of the factor, right? Remember, we use these factors. These are factors of production, so we are using them as inputs in the production of either commodity X or Y. So it comes in either it's cheap in terms of price, or again, you look at it in sheer numbers. So if you look at China, I mentioned already that China and India have got a lot of people, right? Nearly, I don't know, there's close to 1 billion people in China. So that should give you an idea that labor is a lot cheaper in China. So if you had a factory here also in Africa, right? If you had a factory in Africa, it's likely that, okay, let's not talk of Africa because labor is relatively cheap also in Africa. Let's say in the United States, they have a lot of laws, labor laws, that you can't hire someone for say, 100 rand an hour or less than 100 rand an hour. They've got tight laws. They've got human rights there, as human rights shall rightly be called. So labor is quite expensive in the United States. So when you talk of countries like United States, United Kingdom, it's gonna be cheaper. It's gonna be very expensive for you to produce something using labor, because those people have rights, right? So you can't really pay them less. So under those circumstances, hence it became cheaper for the companies in the United States to migrate and go to China. Factories in particular, not companies. So the companies remained, but the production was shipped to China. Why? Because China has a lot of people, it's factor abundant. So it means usually when there's a lot of people, then the labor rates are going to be low in China and India. So if you watch the movies, or if you watch the documentaries on China and you look at how the factories are, you find a lot of people there, quite a lot of people there running a manufacturing, or in a manufacturing plant. Either they're doing clothes, doing these things that we are buying here. You see, so at the end of the day, they are able to manufacture those things cheap. So under those circumstances, now if we are going to look at China,
isn't that if we need the labor from United States, we get them via the procedure called expatriation or local plus.
But how much would you pay them now? That's the big thing.
And sorry.
How much?
And if we get them, obviously, the expatriation process, it's very expensive, because now we then tend to think that these guys, they have got a lot of knowledge and skill because they're coming from USA.
If you look at
nature, expats are very expensive.
Yes. Go ahead. Is it Mbali?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
You were actually comparing United States with China. Like if they were producing one product, right? Then the other country, like United States, United Kingdom, although but you're gonna spend more as compared to a China, even if they were producing one commodity.
Yes, true. That's
true. Okay.
Yes, because what you should consider, Mbali, also is just go on the internet and look at your own profession, and you look at how much they are paid in the United States and how much they are paid in China and how much they are paid.
Does the population also count?
Sorry?
With regard to the population?
Yes, the population. It also counts a lot. Also, I'll explain why. Let's start off with the labor rates. Let's say you are a business owner, right? Let's look at this from the perspective of a business owner. And you want to manufacture a phone, and you are in UK, and they tell you that for us to make this phone for you, it's going to be £100 an hour. But China is saying, we can make this phone for you £20 per hour. So what would you rather do? Go to China, right? Manufacture it in China where they have. So that was what was happening. But why is it cheaper in China? The issue of population now, we're saying sector abundance now. When there are a lot of people in that say, a lot of people that can manufacture that thing, normally it's semi-skilled workforce, right? Semi-skilled workforce to unskilled workforce. So when there are a lot of,
there are a lot.
Yeah. Remember from labor economics, where you have demand and supply of labor, where the supply of labor is high, then the wages are gonna go down.
Go down.
So so you find that those people in China, which is why again the complaint that's coming in now with our immigration laws here, you realize now that when a lot of immigrants come in, it means that there is an oversupply of labor. And what happens to the wages? The wages go down.
Go down.
The business people are benefiting. But if you are the one that is selling your labor force, now you have a problem. If your labor force is semi-skilled, if you want to work, say, at a restaurant, for instance, they can afford that. If you demand a higher income, then they can simply hire the next person. So the rates are gonna go down. So that's the complaint also that going on overseas with immigration and all that.
Exactly. That is why we also mentioned the part of the expatriation, to say, because those countries, they specialize with skill, like USA, China, they've got a lot of skilled people, and they, considering the population as well, there are a lot of people who carry the skills, variety of skills. So that is why we're saying the only way, or some of the way they will come to Africa is via expatriation. And how much are they going to earn? We've also mentioned that they're going to earn higher because we consider the skill and where they come from as well.
Yes. Maybe what can we do on our to improve on this? Besides what we've already mentioned, what would we do? Just so maybe we are looking at labor and capital. Maybe if we can improve on our skills in Africa, of course. Back to the issue we were talking about earlier. Take serious maybe our financial institutions. Educational institutions. Yeah.
For me, we still studying the apartheid education. For me, the first thing that we need to change is the what do we call it? This syllabus, educational syllabus.
Curriculum.
We should change a bit, and maybe try to teach our youth new things, man. We can't keep on talking about the apartheid once again. What are these children going to learn? You go back to history, you learn about the shrub. What are you going to do with the trees? You understand? Those are some of the problems that we have. We should at least be abreast of technology. Technology is broad. It's not networking only.
The system must change.
Yes. Educational system needs to change. We need to teach our children how to program. We need to teach them how to create the computer system, all those things, barcode. If we can't do that, which means we have to export the skill from outside.
True. I 100% agree with that. I think once we can, so which is why I think one time our minister was saying the problem of unemployment in the country is a structural problem. I think skills set. People end up, we have degrees, but that we can't use, at the end of the day.
I'm learning from someone from Majaiva who had the theory of what you call, I don't even know the guy. Why can't we produce one of the theories of ourselves in Africa? That would be great.
Something that's specifically, because we assume that once it's created here in Africa, then it's going to be suited for the problems that we have here. It's going to solve the problems that we have here in Africa.
But I think another major challenge we have in our countries that we have not identified what our skills are, because what we focus more on is the skills that we obtain through formal education. There are people who are genuinely skilled. We learn skills in different ways. Some people, I can not go through formal education, but find that when I go and compete in a job space, I would be more skilled as compared to someone who went to varsity and then come back. And then when we go to the job markets, I'll be more employable as compared to that person, because I have undergone through certain training or skills development outside the classroom. So I think we just need to also revisit as to how do we then define skills, because the manner in which we define skills, it's just based on certification rather than experience and learned skills and whatever. Yes, in that note.
Yeah, you put it very well there. No addition or reducing, but again, we should keep it consistently. You have those guys that are genuinely gifted by nature, but how many are they? You have got few, but at least we can standardize some of the things to say, okay, educational system, let's change it. Let's give our domestic people at least a chance, free platform to showcase their talent. Understand?
Nice.
That would be great.
Yeah, that would, I think that would really work out in as far as improving our skills. And maybe if you look at people like the Mozambicans, for instance, the Mozambicans are very good with. I had one electrician that used to come to my place. I doubt he has a formal education on that. But if you put him in the house, he can solve most of your electrical problems. The other one was doing our gardening, and then the other one with cars also. Most of the mechanics are from Mozambique. No formal education.
Baba. Exactly. I trusted, but just be careful, just to give you an advice, just be careful, these guys. My car was once broke down. I've taken it to those guys from Mozambique to kind of fix it. They tried. I used it for 1 week, and after 1 week, it gets broken again. I ended up buying a new engine for the same car. And then after that, came back to them, tried to fit engine. They couldn't fit the engine properly. I had to literally take the car to Hyundai themselves just to fix the entire car. And I ended up paying a lot of money. So because why? We need shortcut. We need to spend less. That is why I'm trying to compare the quality.
True.
And what is
Okay. Dando?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I can see time is not on our side, but I wanted to ask this question because now we're speaking on factor abundance. Okay, with my understanding with what you said about it, I just want to check. You remember the story about Rainbow closing down because of I think it was chicken from Brazil. So they had to close down, and they also had to retrench workers because they felt that they were producing too many chickens. It was over surplus supply, I think. So is that also factor abundance?
So what happened there with Rainbow? That chicken from Brazil does have factor abundance in terms of chickens. They were better than us, hence they could afford to flood our market with that chicken. Remember how cheap the chicken was? So in the end, we ended up having, so we ended up having a problem here with our local producers of chicken because they couldn't match those ones. So it could be a reason of they, particularly the technology, right? How they produce that chicken. It's GMO, it's genetically modified, so they can basically grow those chickens maybe in 2 weeks or so. Ours, I assume they should take between 4 and 6 weeks. So because they could produce them a lot cheaper than us, then we imported from them. But the problem was now our local market suffered. So sometimes then when you want to make decisions at government level, then you need to try and to get a trade-off between getting cheap chicken and a huge population gains by consuming chicken that is cheap, but at the expense of jobs being lost in the local market at the same time. So what we're explaining so far on factor abundance now is the reason why Brazil can produce chickens cheaper than us. So which means their factors of production are more suited for the production of chicken than us. So maybe their labor is more skilled there in the production of chicken than our labor. So hence we ended up being on the losing side. So maybe the option to dealing with that is to put in embargoes or trade restrictions, any of those trade restrictions, but it's up for discussion. Depends with what you guys think on that.
Yeah,
Alright,
I read
think,
somewhere that unions wanted to have a mass action because they had negotiations with the governments that they should impose or tighten the tariffs in terms of imports of those chickens.
Yes, I remember that time as well. But on the next session, you let me know what you think about that, guys. So maybe in the next session we can incorporate trade restrictions too, and then we have a nice discussion like today, so that we hear what you guys think about those trade restrictions, whether the trade unions are justified in matching, or whether they shouldn't have matched. They should have let free trade go loose.